Hi everybody, this is Dr. Black, and I wanted to spend just a little bit of time going over the types of variables that you have to choose for your own study this week, part of your discussion as well as a part of your assignments. And first, let me excuse myself for got this frog in my throat, so I'll do my best to be as clear as I can. So first, what I'm hoping to do here is allow students, you guys, the ability to identify, differentiate, and apply the various types of variables to your own research scenario. First, let's talk about the independent variables. Now, these are variables that researchers, that you use to manipulate or categorize in order to observe their effect on another variable. Independent variables remain constant. So let's look at a study where we explore the relationship between police presence and crime rates. So the number of police patrols would be and could be your independent variable. And remember, you can have more than one independent, and you want to have more than one dependent. So if we know the independent variable, let's look at the dependent variables. Now, these are variables that we use to measure to see if they change due to the manipulation or categorization of the independent variable. So the independent variable is going to impact your dependent variable. As I said, independent variable remains constant, but your dependent variable is what you're measuring. That's what's going to change. So the example, using the same study, the crime rate would now be our dependent variable, as we're trying to observe it to see if it changes based on our independent variable of the police presence. So let's now talk about intervening or mediating variables. Now, these are the types of variables that provide a link or can explain the relationship between the independent and the dependent variable. So an example with the same study we're using, in the police presence and crime rate study, community trust might be an intervening variable. So maybe a higher police presence increases the trust in the community, which in turn might decrease crime rates. So that makes that an intervening or mediating variable, because it's impacted through both of them. Next, excuse me, let's talk about moderating variables. Now, these variables influence the strength or direction of the relationship between the independent and dependent variable. So an example, taking our previous study, the type of neighborhood, whether it could be urban or suburban, might actually be a moderating variable. So the police presence might reduce crime rates more significantly in urban areas compared to suburban areas. And remember, too, that we could look at that intervening variable of the community trust. Let's now talk about control variables. These are variables that researchers hold constant or control in some fashion to isolate the relationship between the independent and dependent. And I know that's a little bit hazy there, so let's look at the example. The average income level of a neighborhood might be controlled in our study to ensure that observed changes in crime rates are due to the presence and not the economic factors. So how would we do that? How are we going to control the average income? We're only going to look at neighborhoods that have an average income. So we're going to control that variable so it doesn't impact our study. For instance, if you're doing a study on violent juveniles and you are interviewing juveniles, you don't want a variable on an adult that's committed a violent crime in your study. So you want to control and hold constant in order to isolate that relationship. Let's talk about now confounding variables, uncontrolled external factors that might affect the outcome of an experiment or study. So these can provide alternative explanations for an observed relationship that you find between your independent variable. So an example of this, in our study of the police presence, a new community outreach program could be introduced at the same time as the community increases police presence. So if the crime rate drops, it might be unclear now whether it was due to the increased police presence or the outreach program. Does that make sense? Let's look at what you're doing within your discussion and your assignment. As I said, you're going to conceptualize and operationalize the variables that you choose for your study. Now, be aware that these could change as you move through your research and start really developing your methods. But conceptualizing, this is the process of defining a concept within your study. So you need to do this as part of your methods section. For our independent variable for our study we're talking about, which is the police presence, we might conceptualize it as the frequency of police patrols in a given area. So what are you doing? You're defining your variable. So for the dependent, which is the crime rate, we would conceptualize that as the number of reported crimes in a given area over a set period. And as I was saying, you're going to do this within your methods section for all your variables. Now let's talk about how we're going to operationalize our variable. And now this is the process of defining how you will measure the concept that you have just defined. So for our independent variable, which is the police presence, we could operationalize it by saying that we're going to measure the number of police patrols in a square mile over a 24-hour period. And for our dependent, we can operationalize by saying we're going to collect the number of reported crimes in a square mile over a month. Then we're going to compare those two numbers together through our statistics. And by conceptualizing and operationalizing variables, we can ensure more clarity, consistency, and also that we're really measuring genuinely the concepts that we're studying. I hope this has helped to explain the types of variables that you'll be using within your study. If you have any questions on this, please post in Canvas so that everybody can see, because they might have the same question. And also remember, when you're learning how to do research in criminal justice, no question is too silly. You know, you might be thinking, I should know this, I should know the answer. But it's okay. You know, there's a lot of information to learn in a short period of time.